As you know by now, Cruise Through HTX seeks to share the stories of the individuals, businesses, and organizations that make the greater Houston area great. And this next guest is the epitome of this podcast's mission. His name is Gabriel Najera. Born with no arms and feet that are upside down, he shares his inspiring journey of overcoming challenges and changing mindsets. He talks about the importance of not making excuses and instead finding solutions to achieving goals. You are thoroughly going to enjoy this episode, including the story of how he learned to drive and how he got his driver's license. Overall, his message is one of empowerment and the belief that if he can do it, anyone can. Catch up with Gabriel at ifican-youcan.com. And if you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you, please share with your family and friends and subscribe to the show. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ed Sheeran. This is Bruno Mars.
Hey, it's Katy Perry.
This is your man Flo Rida with Freddie Cruz.
This is AJ Mitchell with Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Let's go pick Mr. 305 and you already know what it is.
My name is Freddie, and it's time to cruise through HTX. I want to begin the conversation with a video I saw of yours on Instagram. It is where you pick up a weight with your toes and fling it into a water, and you're at the beach.
That was a Frisbee.
A Frisbee. Okay.
It was a Frisbee.
Okay. I thought it was a weight. I'm like, oh my God, don't hit somebody.
Actually, I was hoping that when it came back, we didn't hit anybody.
Let's talk about that, because you are doing all these things that the average person does, and that maybe somebody who sees you is like, oh, you couldn't throw a Frisbee. But you don't have that mindset. You do everything we do. Your motto is, if I can do it, you can do it.
That's right.
So talk about that.
Well, actually, speaking of Frisbees, I was invited one day to a party. It was a backyard party. This guy had a nice size residence, and in his backyard he had a big old swimming pool, and he had even a little small lake where you could fish. And they decided to play this game that you toss a small size Frisbee and try to get it to land in these little baskets. And everybody got a different, Frisbee. And when they came up to me, they were like, well, we can throw it for you. I was like, what do you mean throw it for me? Excuse me? Just give me the Frisbee. And, I took the Frisbee, of course, with my foot. And they were like, well, how are you going to throw it? I said, could you stand aside? You're in my way. Everybody was throwing theirs, and I threw mine, and I was the one that I didn't hit the basket, and nobody else did, but I was the one that came closest to it. And everybody's like, "Oh!" And from there, they let me play the rest of the game.
How long did it take for you to train yourself to do that with your toes?
Well, as long as it took you to do it with your hands.
Really? Okay, so you've got that much eye to foot coordination that it's just second nature, like riding a bike, as if
the mind adapts to whatever the situation is. Just like people who are blind and people who are deaf, the mind adapts to whatever the situation is, because the mind is always in survival mode. That's your number one basic instinct, is survival. So the mind is set to always look for a way to do things. It's whenever we get into the logic part that our logic later sometimes takes over and makes us lazy and say, I don't want to do it. Not because I can't, just because I don't want to. But people will use the excuse, I can't. When really what they mean is, I don't want to, so I'm not going to do it. But no, the mind adapts to whatever the situation is. So in my case, not having no arms, my mind says, my feet, they're my hands.
And that's as far back as you can remember, being a little boy and just being able to do that.
I mean, just naturally my mind says, okay, you need to pick that up, grab it with your feet.
Wow. I love that. But going back to not being able to versus not wanting to, and therefore making an excuse that, you can't. But in reality, you really don't want to. How do you convince people, as a coach, how do you convince people to see otherwise, that they really can if they just apply themselves?
Well, first of all, when I'm sitting in front of somebody and they're trying to tell me I can't, I just kind of give them that look, with my eyes and say, look, you're not talking to a newbie here, you're talking to a pro, so come on, let's get down to it and tell me why you really don't want to do it. And so then they start opening up about, it's not really what I want, or it's not, it's not in my religion or whatever, and I'm like, okay, fine, you can give me whatever excuse you want, but just admit you don't want to. Okay, once we get past that, then we can move on to better things like, okay, so what are you going to do with your life?
And it's as easy as just calling them out on their, I guess, for lack of a better term, BS, saying,
exactly.
Well, you really don't want to.
Well, life is like a hand of poker, you play your cards. And if you know how to play your cards, you know how to win.
And I guess most people that you speak with don't realize that it's not because they can't. They don't realize that they just don't want to, I guess.
Right. I'd say about 90% of the people I talk to, they know,
Oh, so they know that they don't want to, and they're just making it. Okay.
It's just an excuse, I can't, It's like, okay, why not?
But what about people who legitimately think that they can't, but then maybe, I guess, subliminally speaking, they're just making an excuse, and they just don't realize that they're making an excuse.
Yeah, well, there are cases, like, for instance, this one lady that, she's in her 40s, and she has a fear, which is where we come into, what your imagination is, what kind of movie your imagination is going to play in your mind. But she has this fear of driving, and I'm like, hey, what's your problem? I can drive. And she's like, yeah, that's amazing, because she says, I can't drive. I get panic. Well, then we start looking into, okay, what's the movie in your mind? What's playing there? Are you replaying, a movie you saw at the theater where, you see so many crashes, and so therefore then your mind starts blocking, why you're thinking like that. Sometimes I try to practice a little bit of hypnosis with people, and I'm not talking the deep hypnosis where, you send people back in time or anything like that, but just, some light hypnosis of saying, hey, look, let's put that to rest, and let's move on. Let's get past that. And that seems to work sometimes, most of the time. If you're watching a movie and you're sitting there crying your eyes out, you're under hypnosis. That movie's got you hypnotized, and they've got into your emotions, and they've got into your deep level of your subconscious to where they're making you cry. That's hypnosis, and that's pretty much like the same thing I do in my conferences. As I'm talking to people, people become actually hypnotized with me and watching me, and then I one of the things that has made my speeches, my conferences successful is that I can take people on a roller coaster. I can make them laugh, and then I can make them cry, and then make them laugh again and make them cry. And people like that because it makes them feel good.
It's the perfect slogan for what you do. If I can do it, you can do it. So using these storytelling tools, make them laugh, make them cry, go back and forth, the seesaw, that you can help people realize that they can do this. They can hypnotize people with what they do as well, almost.
I don't really want to say hypnotize. I like to say that we can be an example.
An example, or maybe influence. Use their influence for a positive way.
Let's be an influence. Let's be an example of what can be done, and say that, hey, look, why not? If it's for good, let's do it.
Let's go back to when you were born in Mexico. And something you said when I had seen you speak at the Katie Fulshire Chamber meeting, it was that you were given a very short lifespan, right? And then they realized that you were outliving what the doctor said. And they're like, okay. And the parents were like, well, we need to do with him. We need to, I guess, stimulate his brain, help him learn.
Well, what I really said in the conference is that the day I was born, as I came out of my mother's womb, they realized that, hey, I didn't come with all the, everything in the package, that was supposed to be there. There's no arms, and my legs were turned upside down, and they, their first response, and we're talking back in the 60s, when handicapped kids just weren't quite accepted.
Right.
So therefore, the mindset was that I was born with no life, Because, I mean, nobody comes out talking or screaming, It's not until they slap you in the butt that, you start screaming. Well, because they saw me and all of a sudden thought, I was dead. And then I started crying and he's not dead, but, he doesn't have all the package, so there's no telling if there's anything else missing inside the body that may prevent him from living, a very long life. So, which is why they say, well, he may not live more than maybe a couple of hours or a couple of days, because back then they really didn't have much experience, especially when you're talking about a third world country, and in Mexico back then, third world, second world, whatever you want to call it, but not as advanced in technology and in human behavior as we would say in the United States. So then as I started growing, I got past, the 2 weeks and the 2 months, then they were like, okay, well, he looks like he's going to be around for a while, so now let's change the focus here and let's start thinking, what can he do, or what are the possibilities of him being able to actually have a life? And so my parents then started, to think about, okay, so maybe as he gets older, we can try to put him in a school and maybe try to, get him going in the educational system, and they did.
And that's how you ended up in Port Arthur. And I want to go back to your life as a boy and growing up, and in the 60s and in the 70s and 80s, I imagine as well. I guess, handicapped people were thought of as, there was a lot of othering, which I think othering is a term that was made popular over the past few years, it seems. But there was a lot of othering that was happening. So when did you start to see yourself as not another, but rather one of everybody else? You just happen to not have arms.
I don't think I've ever saw myself as another.
I love that.
Rather, I've always thought that, hey, if he's doing it or she's doing it, why can't I, Oh, okay, well, maybe because it's too tall and I can't reach it. Okay, that's fine. I can live with that. But if it's something that looks like I can do, then by all means, I go for it. And I've never thought of myself as being handicapped or being different, but rather, my mind has always been the mindset of looking for a solution and not dwelling on the problem. You just mentioned that, I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, which was the big difference between living in Mexico and living in the U.S. Was that in Mexico, as I just mentioned, it wasn't a country prepared for handicapped people, so therefore they kind of always set them aside. They would send them up to live in, like the grandparents' ranch or farm or whatever, or some aunt and uncles, a place where they could hide them because they didn't really have the, I want to say the education, but as well as probably they didn't have another example of someone that they could look up to and say, okay, well, that guy didn't have arms and he did it, I'm sure that maybe mine can. But rather it was always, let's just hide them. So therefore there was never no example.
They didn't have an adult version of you.
Probably, yes. An adult version or a successful adult version of me. Mm-hmm. And so, but however, my dad, he was a biochemical engineer for a large company in Mexico at the time. And he got to travel all over the world where they would, the company would send him on business. And so my dad, he had a exposure to the U.S. mentality and Canadian mentality and a couple of, European countries where, the mentality was not to hide the handicapped person, but rather to, focus on their strengths and go on that. And it was that through my dad's travels that he ran across a school in the U.S., as he's mentioned, in Port Arthur, Texas, that was a school for handicapped kids. And that school was not your typical place where people would just drop their kids off and forget about them. Or there was an actual school where we were actually part of the school district, the local school district, and they had the same curriculums as they did in other schools. The only difference was we were all, there with some type of handicap or disability or whatever you want to call it. Some were in wheelchairs. Most of them were in wheelchairs. Some were paraplegic. Some were, muscular dystrophy, muscular sclerosis, or they were blind or deaf. So they always had to adapt the curriculum to whatever the special need of the students, but always focusing on the fact that everyone could learn. I think the only type of kids that were not accepted at the school was if their level of mentality was, so low that they really thought that they were not teachable, then they were not accepted. But otherwise, all types of handicaps were accepted. And through my dad's travel, he came across that school, and he was like, okay, this is the place. So, they took me to see the school and said, hey, this is, your opportunity here. Because they had taken me previously to some other schools in Mexico City that kept turning me down because the schools were thought that they would have to spend too much individual one-on-one time with me for me to be able to learn, that they didn't have the manpower, or let's just say they didn't really want to. So therefore, my only option was to find a place that would, and this was the place in Port Arthur.
How old were you when you moved down here or up here rather, from Mexico to Port Arthur?
I was 6 years old.
6 years old. And so what was your earliest memory, your earliest favorite memory of, like, wow, I guess you wouldn't, a 6-year-old wouldn't say, oh, these are my people, but what was your favorite memory of being in that school when you first got there?
Well, when I first got there, growing up in Mexico City, because I was there, the first 5 years of my life, I have an older brother. He's a year older than me. And so the first 4 years of my life until he turned 5 was, playing with my brother, like, most households. And so, I would always watch him, as he would play with, certain toys. I would say, hey, I can play with that too. I want to play. And so, we played together. But then as, he's turned 5 and he started going to school, I was like, hey, I want to go to school too. I want to do like my brother. Of course, like I said a while ago, you always follow examples, And so my brother was my example at that time, and that he was going to school, and then all of a sudden I saw that he was carrying these books, and he was carrying these colors, and he was, having friends, and all of a sudden he was making a life that I wanted to do. But when I turned 5, my parents started taking me to some different schools, and when I wasn't being accepted, I was like, well, wait a minute, how come my brother got accepted and I didn't? I want to go to school too. So when this opportunity came up at the school in Port Arthur, and my parents took me there to go see it, and I was like, you mean I can go to school too? And they're like, yeah, this is school. And I can have my own books and my own colors and play with, the rest of the kids here. Yeah. I was like, hey, yeah, let's go for it. I never thought twice about being there, even though, it was like a boarding school. And I lived there with the other kids while my parents and my family stayed in Mexico. Everybody always asks me a big question, well, didn't you feel bad, being away from your family? Because I lived there 9 months out of the year, and then I would go back to Mexico for the Christmas vacation and the summer vacation. And I was like, well, I still get to go home for, the summer and Christmas, especially Christmas, because, I know Santa Claus, goes to my house, so, I get to be there when Santa Claus shows up.
Yeah.
So, hey, yeah, I don't mind, living away from them. Besides, the rest of the kids there, we eventually became a family.
It seems like you had a college experience, but as a little boy. I mean, you went away for the entire school year, and you're back for Christmas vacation and summer.
I guess you can associate that with being in college, because for me, being in college was the same thing. I was living at the college dorms and still going to school, and then go home for the holidays. But I think it was harder for my parents, or rather, it was harder for my mom than it was for me. There's a teacher that retired from that school, and I still keep in touch with her. And we met up about a year or two ago one day, and we were sitting there talking, and she was like, and she told me the story. She says, "I'll never forget your mother's face the first day when they left you at the school." She said, "I'll never forget her. You know, she was so sad, and she was just, bawling her head off, and crying because, she was leaving you there. You were going to be there by yourself." And she said, "I'll never forget, that, you started to walk away, and your mom was, wanting to go back and run towards you, or she stood there and waited to see if you were going to turn around and come back, and you didn't. You just kept on walking, You were going to go off and do your own thing.
Party time, school time.
And that's when your mother realized that, hey, this might not be such a bad idea."
Oh. I can't help but think that it all has to do with the environment in which you grew up in.
Right, we're all victims of our environment. Some people may argue that, and they're like, "Well, no, I grew up, in the poor neighborhood, but I, made something of myself." And we do have exceptions, and people can grow out of their environments and stuff and become, something better than their environment. But unfortunately, I would say more than 90% or the human race, is a victim of their environment. And if you're raised in a good environment, then you're probably going to have, a much better life than if you're raised in an environment that's not so good. Yes, my parents were educated enough. My mom was a school teacher, as a matter of fact, and my dad was, like I said, biochemical engineer. So they pretty much had, knowledge of the fact that, hey, this kid, he may not have arms, but he's got a brain. And so let's make the best of, what he's got. And they did. They set me up in this environment at the school where they realized that all the kids there, not just me, but all the kids there had something against, their odds that they had to overcome. And so the mentality at the school was, hey, just do it. Don't fall down, but do it. Another story about my mom one day after I'd been there already, a couple of years, my mom and dad were dropping me off, and they were standing at the doorway with the school director. The school director was standing there talking to them. And my mom used to tell me the story that she never forgot that one day there was another kid on crutches that was, just coming down the hallway, walking, and all of a sudden the kid falls down. And my mom's first instinct was to want to go run to help the kid, but the director grabbed my mom's arm. She grabbed her by the arm and said, "No, just wait." And that the director, she didn't play treating the kid like a victim, but rather she just said, "Wait." And that she stood there watching to make sure that the kid was all right, but the kid had to learn to get up. And my mom said that was another lesson that she, will never forget, that experience of you don't always run to try to solve people's problems, but rather you wait and see how they're going to solve the problem, because in life, that's what you do. You fall down and you get back up. Everybody usually says, if you fall off the horse, get back on it again, And that was the case that my parents learned about me also, is that, they couldn't always be there, but rather it was probably the best that they left me so that my mother wouldn't always want to be there to, do everything for me.
And that is something I was thinking about just last night, Gabriel. And that is the struggle of a parent to want to be there, to sort of be that helicopter. Everyone bags on helicopter parents, right? Always there carrying the backpack for the kid as they're walking to school in the rain, right? And it seems like the line is much more finer than we think, where we want to be there, we want to help, but at the same time, we also have to introduce struggle and let our kids sort of figure out how to get up, as you were saying, how to get up when they fall down. This kid with the crutches, he's got to figure it out.
Exactly. You call them struggles. It's not just struggles, but, sometimes we also use the word mistakes. Sometimes we use the word failures, and sometimes we use, different, tags that we can use. But it's all about learning to do it yourself, and not becoming dependent on anybody, but rather just, hey, it's a learning lesson. You fall down, you learn to get up. You make mistakes, so what? You learn from them. And you move on because, time doesn't stop for anybody. So it's not going to stop for you to try to sit there and wonder what are you going to do and feel sorry or anything like that. Time moves on. Life keeps moving on, and we just got to keep moving on with it.
You have such a positive outlook on everything, Gabriel. I'm wondering, has there been in recent memory a time when you thought, wow, this just isn't going to work? Maybe in business, personal life, anything?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm still human.
Well, I mean, your mindset is superhuman. I mean, it's just, it radiates.
Well, like I said, I grew up, with the environment around me of, hey, let's do it. Whatever it takes, let's do it. Let's figure out a way to do it. Starting back to my childhood, like I told you, I grew up my first 5 years with my older brother, teaching. I was playing with toys and stuff like that, and trying to figure out, hey, how can I also play with the toys?
Did you want to get that?
No, I'm going to turn it off. Sorry about that.
It's all good.
I forgot to turn it off when I got out of the car.
All good.
But my older brother was like, hey, you want to play with the cars? Just grab one. And so it was always my life and my challenge to let's figure out how I can also do it. And that's where my mindset began to be positive and not thinking, oh, I can't do it. I'm just going to wait for somebody else to do it for me. But rather, hey, those toys look cool. I want to play with those toys too. Mm-hmm. And so there, my mind, I think, began to start working in what you call positive mode of saying, hey, I can do it. I can do it. And so now, and everything I do right now, everything, it's always, okay, so maybe I shouldn't go that way because, there's a small roadblock, but I'm sure there's another way around it, so let's go find that other way and see what happens.
And you drove here in the rain.
Well, I mean, I didn't get wet. I was in the car.
Yeah.
People say, oh, it's raining. Okay. So
and?
You're not going to walk there, are you? No, but I might get wet. Okay, so you're not made of sugar, are you? You're not going to melt, so what's the big deal? You bathe in the water, be glad that it's raining. That way you got enough water to take a bath with.
How long did it take for you to learn how to drive?
Well, driving is my driving is kind of a little story that I always like to tell people in my conferences, even though sometimes I don't have enough time to tell the story. But, ever since I was 12 years old or so, or 10, 12 years old, I remember, being able to ride in the car with people as a passenger, and I always used to look over to the people driving. I was like, there's no big science to driving, okay? All you do is you push one pedal to make it go, and you push another pedal to stop. That's it. Come on. There's no big science. Hey, I can drive. One day I'm going to drive too. And people used to tell me, oh, man, you're crazy. How are you going to be able to drive? You can't reach the pedals. Your legs are too short, and you need one hand for the brake. I mean, one foot for the brake, one foot for the gas, and you need two good hands to grab onto the steering wheel. And and they used to tell me that it's going to be impossible for me to be able to drive. It just no, it's not impossible. I mean, there's no big science. And I was like, I can drive. I can drive. And so I think from that time, in my observations, that was my learning. My learning period of riding in the car with someone. And so by the time that when I graduated from college and I moved out, and when I said I moved into the world, that I needed transportation. So I started looking around. Okay, what is it going to take? Well, first I got to have a car. Okay, so I don't have any money. How can I get a car here? And we're driving around. Riding around one day with a friend of mine. His car was needing repairs, and we drove to this junkyard to go, pick a part from it and stuff like that. And there was this car there for $500. And I was like, does it run? And they're like, yeah, it runs. So, I called up my dad and, hey, can I borrow $500? He's like, what for? And I want to buy a car. He said, come on, what are you going to do with the car? You're going to pay somebody to drive it? And I said, no, I'm not going to pay anybody. That's going to be my car. And my dad, are you serious? And I said, yeah. And he said, $500?
That was a lot of money back in the day, too.
Well, yeah, it was a lot of money. Yeah. It's like probably saying, $1,000 today, or $1,200, which you can buy a little junkie for $1,200, Back then, this car was a 77 Monte Carlo.
Oh, okay.
And that was, those long-ass, big old boats,
My grandpa Freddie had one.
Well, they were sitting out there in front, and once I opened the door, I realized why, it was only $500. It didn't have a floorboard, it was all rusted out. And I was like, hey, but this is perfect, I just throw a piece of carpet on there, and that's it, But as long as it runs, that's all I need, And so I bought it, and my dad sent me the money. I bought it, and this friend of mine that I was going to college with, he was a mechanic. He was always out there in college working on his car. And so I asked him, I said, hey, you think you can help me fix this car for me to drive? And he's like, you really think you can do it? And I said, come on, you know me. And he said, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Nothing ever stops you. And I was like, so why is this going to be any different? And he's like, well, okay, if you think you can do it, I'll help you. Just tell me what you want to do with it. And ever since, like I said, when I was 12 years old, I always said, all I need to do is be able to reach the gas and the brake. That's all I need. And then I can probably recline the seat back far enough so that I can raise my other leg and grab the steering wheel. And that's it. That's what my modification is on my vehicle, and it has been ever since. My friend helped me, we picked up some scrap metal pieces here and there and made this rod that connects underneath the steering column to the gas and the brake. So you push it to the left with my right foot, I push it to the left with the brake, and push it to the right for the gas. That's it. And then with the other foot, I turn the steering wheel. I mean, nothing difficult, nothing complicated. I did, to add to the story, I did go to this government agency at first when I was trying to figure out what I needed to drive.
And when you say government agency, not the DPS?
Not the DPS.
Okay.
No, there was a government agency called the Texas Rehabilitation Commission, which I don't know if it still exists or not, but back in those days, it was an agency that would help handicapped people to get whatever they needed to be able to have a life. For some, it meant paying them for the school, for some special training or adaptive equipment. And that was one of the things that they used to pay for was adaptive vehicles for people who needed, So I went to them as I was recommended by somebody to go to them. And I went to them and they said, yeah, well, you think you could drive? I said, yeah, I can drive. All I need is to be able to reach the gas and the brake. And, and we describe what it was that I needed. And they're like, well, it sounds like, that's too simple. I was like, no, it's not too simple. It's all I need. And they're like, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to set you up. We're going to send you to the Corps of Engineers at Texas A&M University, where they have some of the best engineers there. We're going to set you up a meeting with the Corps of Engineers. There's a group of about 12 people, and they're going to look at you and decide what kind of modification they think would be best. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, no problem. Set me up. So they did. And I went out to Texas A&M one day, and I walked in this room, and it was like, walking into, the 12 disciples there, fixing to decide my life for me. And they took one look at me, and they're like, okay, you look like you got mobility. Yeah, we could probably do something for you.
Stating the obvious.
And so they drew this on this chalkboard, this diagram for all these things that they wanted, to do to the car. They wanted to put some motors on some some small motors on the gas and the brake pedal, so all I have to do is just barely touch them with a button, and that would activate the gas, or another button would activate the brake. And then they wanted to drop the steering wheel down to the floor so that I could, with the other foot reach on the floorboard down there, and then put another set of backup motors inside the trunk in case the motors in the front would fail. There was a backup system that would, handle the motors in the front. And by the time I looked at the drawing on their board, I was like, dang, all of that? And they're like, yeah, this is probably this is what we're going to recommend to the Texas Rehab Commission, so that if you want to drive, this is what you're going to need. I was like, come on. And I said, I looked at that guy and I said, so where am I supposed to sit? And they just, so what? They think you got a better idea or what? You think you're smarter than us?
Oh, no.
I was like, no, I don't think I'm smarter than you. I said, but I don't need all that. I said, that looks like that has a lot of possibility of failure. The more complicated you make it, the more likely you can have failure. Mm-hmm. And okay, so what's your bright idea? I was like, well, all I need is a rod that comes up to my foot, that's hooked up somehow underneath, to the gas and the brake. Push it one way for the gas and the other. And I'm like, oh, no, that's too simple. That is a big chance of failure because it's too simple. You don't have a backup system. And I was like, don't need one. And well, we're sorry, but if you want to go with, if you want to be able to drive, you're going to have to go with our recommendations, or else you're not going to get a license. I'm like, I'm not going to get a license. I said, no, because you're going to have something approved by us in order for DPS to give you a license. I was like, well, I'll tell you what, thank you very much for your time, but I think I'm going to have to pass and maybe look somewhere else. And so I walked out of there, and I was all disappointed, because, I'm not going to be able to drive now because they're not going to want to give me a license. Oh, man, what do I do, And I still hadn't given up on my idea of, of how I wanted to modify the car, and that's when I turned to my friend, and I asked him, I said, what does it take? What do you have to do to get a license? And they're like, well, you just have to read the manual, go take the reading test, and then go do a driving test, and that's it. I was like, that's all? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I asked him, I said, you think it'd be any different for me? And it's like, well, you never know. You never know until you try. So sure enough, I went down there and took the reading test. He helped me modify the car. And I said, so what do I do next? He said, well, just drive down there to the DPS office, and officers are going to get in the car with you, give you some instructions, and if you do everything right, you pass the test. If not, you get 3 chances. I said, okay, well, let's go. He's like, no. You go. I'm not getting in the car with you. I was like, come on. And by this time I had already driven her in a parking lot. We drove around for about half an hour, And he's like, okay, if you feel like you're ready, just go on down there. So I went down and drove to my first time driving on the streets, drove down to the DPS office. And this lady officer walks out of the office and walks up to my car, when it was my turn. She opens the door, gets in the car, puts her seatbelt on, and then turns around and looks at me, and she's like, you're going to drive? I was like, yes, ma'am. She said, okay, do you have insurance? Yes, ma'am. I had already taken out the insurance, and she's like, you think you can drive? And I said, sure, no problem. And I said, but if I can't, then I guess I'll fail the test, right? So I said, yeah, you're right. You get 3 tries, so let's go. So we drove around, and she told me, how to go here and there, turn, stop, blah, 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 blah. Came back to the office, and she's like, okay, one last thing you got to do. And I was like, what's that? She said, you see the little flags over there? She said, you got to go in parallel park. And I looked at the flags, and I looked at the distance between the 2 flags, and I was like, you got to be kidding. I said, you want me to put this big-ass boat between those 2 little flags that were made for a little Volkswagen? She said, yep, you got to fit in there, and you can't touch the flags, or else you won't pass. You failed the entire test. I was like, all right, let's go. So I pulled up, and my friend we already practiced parallel parking because he did tell me that I was going to have to parallel park.
So you already knew how to do this.
Right, I had practice
Okay, so
in
you
the
did
parking
practice.
lot, but it wasn't between those two little flags, It was between two spaces, which were, if I recall, they were much bigger than that space between those two flags.
Almost like they were setting you up for failure.
Well,
Or at least it looked that way.
It looked that way,
Yeah.
But then again, it wasn't. The car fit in there perfect. I didn't have any problem. I pulled it and put it in that space, and once I put it in that space, the officer looked at me and said, "Are you finished?" So whenever you finish, she said, "Just put it in park." So I kicked it in the park, and she's like, "All right." Well, she said, "I don't know how you did it, but you passed." I was like, "Cool, yeah." I said, "I mean, I get my license?" She says, "Yeah, you did everything just fine, and I don't see any problem with you driving." I never mentioned or asked any questions about the adaptive equipment that I had or anything. I just said, "That's all." She says, "Yes, that's it. You'll get your license in the mail." I was like, "Thank you very much. Have a good day." And that was it. Started driving ever since. And now driving all over this country, all over the U.S. I've driven all over Mexico. I've driven down to South America, down to Guatemala and Honduras, and never had, I mean, I'm not going to say never had any problems. I've had a couple of wrecks, because, hey, probability of someone having a wreck, especially living in a city like Houston, they say that the odds are 1 every 5 years. And my first few years, I was running the odds there, but actually I haven't had any wrecks in, I think, about 10 or 12 years.
What about speeding tickets?
Oh, well, can't help those.
How many miles over the speeding limit was your last ticket?
Actually, I haven't gotten a ticket in probably about the same 10 or 12 years. But
Okay.
back when I was younger, let's say, I did like to run. So I think, my fastest speeding ticket was maybe doing 16 or 40, something like that. 'Cause I was
That's
in a
not
hurry.
that bad.
That's not that bad, on the highway, I was like, back when the speed limit was 55.
Yeah.
And it's hard to remember those days, but all the highways, speed limit was 55, and I got pulled over doing 75, one day, 75 and 55. I was like, come on, man, nobody drives 55. And then, I've gotten pulled over a couple of times, and the officer just looks at me and says, and they're like, you drive with your feet? And I was like, yeah, I drive with my feet. And, oh, cool, man. I tell you what, just take it slow. I'm not going to give you a ticket. Just,
Nice.
I was like, thanks, appreciate it. Have a good day.
I love it. But what's so cool? Speaking of 75 and 55 mile per hour speed limits, out in the sticks, there are areas with the 75 mile per hour speed limit. You got to like that.
Oh, I definitely. Actually, you don't have to go that far out. You just go outside the city limits here in Houston, and it goes up to 70. And then if you go a stretch outside, like past San Antonio, from San Antonio to El Paso, it's like a speed limit of 80.
80. Okay, I've never seen 80. I've seen 75, not 80. Wow.
It's 80. It's 80. You go past San Antonio, where there's nothing but dune sands out there, and speed limit's actually 80. Which I don't do 80. I don't do 80 because I notice that, nowadays, and I'm older, I'm more concerned with the gas mileage.
That's the only reason.
That's the only reason.
Oh, man, that's great. Gabriel, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I've got one more question for you, sir, and that would be your words of encouragement for somebody who's just, they're going through some rough times, whether it's an illness, whether it's job loss, a demotion, a divorce, or what have you, but they're in a really dark spot in their life. And what would be some encouraging words that you would share with them?
Well, one of the things that I've learned in life is that everything is mental. Everything is in your mind, and only in your mind. I've studied, done a little bit of digging in some what's called quantum physics, and where they study everything down to the molecule in the quantum world, and in that they kind of bring in everything, science and religion and human nature and psychology. It's just a mixture of everything. But what it all boils down to is that it's all in the mind, and the quantum physics says that if it's not in your mind, then it doesn't exist. So when you put that into practice, the only thing that exists is what you want it to exist. And I'm not saying that you look at a problem and you say, okay, it's not real, so it's not real. No, that's not what I mean. Is that everything is what you want to make it to be. If you want to make a big deal out of it, yeah, it's going to be a big deal. If you don't want to make a big deal, it's not a big deal. It's all in your mind and what kind of thought you put into it, how much energy you put into it. Because everything is energy. That's something else in quantum physics and science. Science teaches that everything exists in physics. Everything is nothing but energy, and energy vibrates in different frequencies, and whatever frequency you choose to vibrate in is what you're going to live. You want to live in a high frequency, you're going to be in a high frequency. You want to live in a low frequency, you're going to be in a low frequency. So, putting aside all of that, not to bore anybody with the physics and the laws of physics, but it is what you want it to be. Okay, you want it to be a big deal. You want to create a big drama. Hey, go for it. It's your life. It's your drama. You're the one that's going to suffer with it. You want to make something better out of your life? Make something better out of your life. Think of it as just an opportunity, and take advantage of the opportunity. Life is full of opportunities. I always tell people in my conferences that the only difference between me and them, meaning with people with their normal bodies, the only difference between me and them is that I see an opportunity and I take it and I make the best of it. Whereas most people, they let all these opportunities pass by them. And I always tell them, if you don't take advantage of the opportunity, someone else will. And you're going to be sitting, on the sidelines. And that's another thing I've learned, and I tell people in my coaching is, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the player on the field, or do you want to be the spectator that's just up there screaming your lungs out, thinking that you're going to, change the world because you're screaming your lungs out when you're not? You're just standing there looking like a fool, screaming your lungs out. Be the player on the field. Be the guy that's throwing the ball. Be the guy that's catching the opportunities, the ball, and run. Run with the ball. Do what you want to do, but do your best at whatever it is that you want to do. And if I can do it, you can do it.
Beautiful. The website, y'all. Check out Gabriel Najera's website, ifican-youcan.com. ifican-youcan.com. He's got a couple of books. You can watch his videos. You can learn more about his coaching programs as well. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to be a part of the podcast.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your audience listening, if they stuck around this long to listen to the ending of it. And also, I'm, of course, being from Mexico, fully bilingual. So, para la gente que está escuchando, si quieren buscar mi página web, si yo puedo, tú puedes.com, Gabriel Najera, Gabriel Najera. That's Najera. A lot of people don't know how to spell the last name, so anyway, Gabriel Najera. Thank you much. It's been a pleasure, and hope to do it again one day.